In this lesson, we dive a little deeper into the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis involves both the light-dependent and the light-independent reactions. So, what do the light-dependent reactions produce? Well, if you think oxygen, you think correct. In fact, we see it right here on the illustration as one of the outgoing arrows. So that is a product of the light-dependent reactions. What is converted in the process of the light-dependent reactions? Well, the answer to that question is ADP and NADP plus are converted into the energy carriers ATP and NADPH. Now, do you recall from a previous lesson where the light-dependent reactions occur? Well, if you recall them occurring in the thylakoids of the chloroplast, you would be correct. And here they are. So the thylakoids are those sac-like membranes that contain most of the machinery needed to carry out light-dependent reactions. Now, photosystems, which are surrounded by accessory pigments, are essential to the light-dependent reactions. Light absorption by photosystems is just the beginning of photosynthesis. Okay, so these photosystems are clusters of chlorophyll and proteins. So, why are most plants green? This is a little bit of a review. We did talk about this in a previous lesson. But the answer that you should be thinking of is that the color green is caused by the reflection of green light by the pigment chlorophyll. Pigments, all pigments, capture light energy during the light-dependent reactions of photosynthesis. All right, so let's focus our attention on the chemical equation in the upper right of this illustration. You see it highlighted in red. And the end result of this light-dependent reaction is to convert ADP and NADP plus into the energy carriers that we know as ATP and NADPH. So there are four main stages of the light-dependent reactions. There is photosystem 2. Now this is going to seem a little backwards because it actually is. There's photosystem 2, and then there's the electron transport chain, and then there's photosystem 1, and then lastly, the fourth stage is hydrogen ion movement and ATP formation. Now, notice that I listed photosystem 2 before photosystem 1, and we see photosystem 2 shown in the illustration ahead of photosystem 1. Well, why is it that these are backwards? Because if everything's moving this direction, then why would photosystem 2 come before photosystem 1? It doesn't make any sense. Well, the fact of the matter is we discovered photosystem 1 prior to discovering photosystem 2. So this was already named photosystem. And then we discovered another photosystem that was still in the same chain of reactions, but it came before the original photosystem. So we said, all right, well, photosystem 1 needs to stay photosystem 1. We'll just have to name photosystem 2, even though it comes first. So it is a little backwards, so you got to try to keep that straight in your mind, okay? All right, so here is, if you haven't figured out where I'm talking about yet, there it is. Photosystem 2 comes before Photosystem 1. All right. Now, after Photosystem 2 does its thing, then we get into the electron transport chain. Okay, and you notice, or maybe you don't, but you should notice that right here, there's a 4e negative. That 4e negative represents 4 electrons, because electrons are negatively charged, so it has a little negative sign there. And that number 4 indicates that there's 4 of them. In fact, you even see 4 yellow dots. Those 4 yellow dots are indicative of electrons. And those electrons are going to move down with the electron carriers, and they're going to basically pass through each of these sections, including photosystem 1. And in the process, they're going to help convert NADP plus into NADPH. And they're also going to help convert ADP into ATP. Now, that's going to happen after the electron transport chain. So the electron transport chain is going to help produce NADPH from our NADP plus interacting with those 4 electrons. Okay. Now, photosystem 2 actually is where the waters get broken apart. And you can see that there is a water here. It's 2 hydrogens, the little blue balls, and the red balls or dots are the oxygen. Let me zoom in on that for you. Okay, so we have the 2 molecules of water. They get broken apart into the 4 hydrogens and the 2 oxygen atoms. And notice that we have 4 hydrogen pluses. That means they lost their electrons. And here's where those electrons went. Okay, so the hydrogens come in with each with an electron, but the 4 hydrogens each lose their 1 electron, because that's all hydrogens have to begin with. And so those electrons then can go to the electron transport chain, where they can provide energy to convert NADP plus into NADPH by attaching one of those H plus ions that was removed from the water onto the end of the NADP plus, and that makes it NADPH. Pretty cool, right? All right, so that's the electron transport chain. Let's take a look at photosystem 1 now. Okay. Photosystem 1 gets some energy in as well, because what is happening is the energy is getting used up from photosystem 2, and so those electrons are a little less active. And what happens in photosystem 1 is they get another jolt of energy from sunlight, and that kind of recharges them a bit more, and they continue doing their work of converting NADP plus into NADPH. All right, so that's how the NADPH is developed. Now let's take a look at how we go from ADP to ATP. All right. So here we have all of these hydrogen ions, these H pluses, that are being removed from the water. They're kind of moving along the inside of the thylakoid and until they get to this ATP synthase. And then, as you know from diffusion, molecules will move from an area of higher concentration to areas of lower concentration. And you can tell there's a lower concentration of H plus ions outside of the thylakoid. So these hydrogens are going to move down through this protein tunnel. It's called an ATP synthase. You see the term right here. And as they move through that protein channel, they're actually going to cause a mechanism within that protein to spin. And that's going to generate energy that converts ADP to ATP by adding a phosphate group to the end of the ADP to give it 3 ATP. So triphosphate. Okay? So that is the ATP synthase portion of the light-dependent reactions. All right, so light energy is absorbed by the electrons that are in the pigments that are found within photosystem 2, and this increases the electron's energy level. So these high energy electrons, which are indicated with an E and a little minus sign, these are passed to the electron transport chain. Okay, so here's photosystem 2. It's blown up a little bit for us to be able to see it a little easier. And as light continues to shine, more and more high energy electrons are passed to the electron transport chain. The thylakoid membrane contains a system that provides new electrons to chlorophyll to replace the ones that it has lost. So where do you think these new electrons come from? Well, they come from the water. Enzymes that are found on the inner surface of the thylakoid actually break up each of those water molecules into 2 electrons, 2 H plus ions, and 1 oxygen atom. So as plants remove those electrons from water, oxygen is left behind, and that's released into the air, again, which is good for us because we need oxygen, right? And that reaction is the source of nearly all of the oxygen found in Earth's atmosphere, believe it or not. All right, so what happens to the electron as they move down the electron transport chain? Well, what we find is that the energy from the electrons is used by the proteins in the chain to pump H plus ions from the stroma into the thylakoid space. So that's what we see happening here. Okay, so we have some hydrogen ions outside of the thylakoid in the stroma, and they're getting pumped across this protein channel to the inside of the thylakoid. We're also getting H plus ions produced from splitting those waters apart back in photosystem 2. So there's a couple sources of hydrogen ions. Now, at the end of the electron transport chain, the electrons themselves actually pass to a second photosystem called photosystem 1. And we see that here. And it looks a lot like the beginning of the electron transport chain where we had that hydrogen pump, right? And it's essentially doing the same thing. All right, so because some of the energy was used in order to pump those H plus ions across the thylakoid membrane, the electrons don't contain as much energy as they used to when they reach photosystem 1. So look closely at photosystem 1 here, and you will notice that the pigments that are in photosystem 1 are going to get struck by light again. So we're getting more light energy into the system. And this really re-energizes those electrons. The electrons continue to follow this yellow path through our illustration here. So at the end of a short second electron transport chain, the NADP plus molecules in the stroma actually pick up the high energy electrons along with some H plus ions at the outer surface of the thylakoid membrane, and that's when they become NADPH. So how many molecules of NADPH can be produced per water molecule that goes into the photosynthetic electron transport? The answer to that question is 2. And as a matter of fact, if we look at our formula again, we do see that we have 2 NADPHs produced. So for every 2 water molecules that split, we get 2 more NADPH. So basically, 1 NADPH per molecule of water. Okay, so it's a 1-to-1 ratio, but they happen to happen in pairs. All right, so why do you think this NADPH is important? Well, NADPH is very important in the light-independent reactions of photosynthesis. So when we get to that section, you're going to find out a lot more about the importance of NADPH. All right, so the thylakoid space is filling up with those positively charged H plus ions. And as that happens, the inside of the thylakoid membrane actually becomes positively charged relative to the outside of the membrane. So H plus ions then pass back across the thylakoid membrane through that protein I mentioned earlier called ATP synthase. And those hydrogen ions are moving down the concentration gradient from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. That's all shown right here. So as the ions pass through, the ATP synthase molecule rotates and the energy produced is used to convert that ADP into ATP. Okay, so the rotation is happening down in this area here to convert ADP into ATP. All right, so what good are the compounds produced in the light-dependent reactions? Well, they have an important role to play in the cell. They provide the energy that's needed to build high-energy sugars from low-energy carbon dioxide. All right, so the light-independent reactions now we're going to talk about, they are commonly referred to as the Calvin cycle. So if you hear me say Calvin cycle, I am talking about the light-independent reactions. But I usually try to use light independent, although Calvin cycle is a little easier to say, a few fewer syllables. So what products of the light dependent reactions are used in the light independent reactions or the Calvin cycle? Well, we talked about it a moment ago, but the reactions use the electron carriers ATP and NADPH from the light dependent reactions to produce high energy sugars such as glucose. So where are those ATP and NADPH? Well, we see them being used in the locations that I just circled. So how many molecules of ATP are needed for each turn of the Calvin cycle? Well, the answer to that, my friends, is 18 ATP molecules are needed for each turn of the Calvin cycle. So where do these light-independent reactions occur? They actually occur in the stroma of the chloroplast. So they're still inside the chloroplast, the organelle that contains the thylakoids and the pigment chlorophyll. But they don't happen inside of the thylakoids. They happen in the space of the chloroplast itself. So what is the main product of the Calvin cycle? Well, the main product of the Calvin cycle are sugars and other compounds. And we see one of those sugars right there. All right, so carbon dioxide molecules, they come into this Calvin cycle from the atmosphere. They get drawn in through the stomata of the leaf on the plant, and they get involved as well. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay. So an enzyme in the stroma of the chloroplast combines these carbon dioxide molecules with the 5 carbon compounds that are already present in the organelle. How many 3 carbon compounds are produced for every 6 carbon dioxide molecules that enter the cycle? There are actually a total of 12 of the 3 carbon compounds that are produced. All right, so how many carbon atoms does a molecule of CO2 contain? Well, the answer to that is 1. There's 1 carbon atom in each molecule of carbon dioxide. So when a carbon dioxide molecule combines with a 5 carbon compound, how many 3 carbon compounds can be produced? Well, the answer is 2 because 1 plus 5 equals 6. 6 divided by 3 is 2. All right, so the 2 3-carbon molecules that were removed, they become the building blocks that the plant cell uses to synthesize or make sugars and lipids and amino acids and other compounds. So the remaining 10 3-carbon molecules are converted back into the 6 5-carbon molecules. All right, and we see those here. Now, you notice that there's a 6 and then there's like all of these carbons. Well, if you count them, there's only 5. So there are 6 of these molecules that contain 5 carbons each. Okay, over here there are 12 molecules that contain 3 carbons, also down here. Then there's 2 and 10. So 2 plus 10, that equals 12. All right, so that gets us back to the 5-carbon molecule, where there's 6 of those, and that is the cycle. So what becomes of the 6 5-carbon molecules? Well, these molecules will combine with 6 new carbon dioxide molecules to begin the next cycle. All right, so 6 molecules of carbon dioxide are used to produce a single 6-carbon sugar molecule. And they use the energy that are supplied by those compounds produced in the light-dependent reactions. So as the photosynthesis process proceeds, the Calvin cycle removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and turns out energy-rich sugars. The plant then uses these sugars to meet its energy needs and to synthesize biomolecules that are needed for growth and development, including lipids, proteins, and other complex carbohydrates like cellulose. When other organisms eat these plants, they too can use the energy and raw materials stored in these compounds. So what happens to the NADP plus and the ADP and the sugars that are produced by the Calvin cycle? Well, ADP and NADP plus become available to pick up more high-energy electrons from the first set of reactions, the light-dependent reactions. And the high-energy sugars are used to meet energy needs or are converted to other materials used for growth and development. All right, so the reactions of photosynthesis are made possible by enzymes that function best between 0 degrees Celsius and 35 degrees Celsius. Temperatures above or below this range may affect those enzymes, either slowing down the rate of photosynthesis or destroying those enzymes so that they can't help those reactions occur. As a matter of fact, at very, very low temperatures, photosynthesis could actually stop entirely. Okay, so this is one of the major factors that affect photosynthesis. If an area experiences several weeks during which the temperature rose every day to 37 to 38 degrees Celsius, which would be about 98 degrees to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, what would you predict about the rate of photosynthesis in this area? Well, the actual answer is that the rate of photosynthesis would actually slow down during that time because the temperatures will exceed the temperature at which photosynthesis reactions work the best. So it's going to slow them down. So highlight intensity also increases the rate of photosynthesis until the plant reaches its maximum rate of photosynthesis, at which point it can't go any faster. So if there were a series of volcanic eruptions and the volcanic ash accumulated in the Earth's atmosphere, what might be the effect on photosynthesis? Well, if you think about that volcanic ash accumulating in the air, that could actually reduce the intensity of sunlight for many, many days. And this, of course, would slow down photosynthesis because of the reduced light intensity. So because water is one of the raw materials of photosynthesis, a shortage of water can also slow down or even stop photosynthesis. So if you think about an area that might experience a drought that lasts, say, for a few months, and where you have lakes and rivers dropping to levels that are lower than anyone could ever remember, what would be the effect of photosynthesis of plants in this area? Well, as you probably guessed, it would slow down and then probably stop as well because without water available, the process can't proceed. Okay, so there are these certain kinds of plants that have a certain adaptations that can help them to survive in these sorts of conditions. C4 plants, for example, have a specialized chemical pathway that allows them to capture even very low levels of carbon dioxide and pass it to the Calvin cycle. This enables photosynthesis to keep working under intense light and high temperatures, but it requires extra energy in the form of ATP to function.